All right, well, our speaker today is Hemant Mehta. He's going to tell you all about how he sold his soul on eBay, so I'm not going to get into that. He's the chair of the board of directors of the Secular Student Alliance. And one thing that's impressed me about him, and this came through in a speech that he gave to the Atheist Alliance last year, is he's a very positive, friendly atheist. And this is something Minnesota Atheists noticed 5 years ago. When we were looking at the upcoming generation, looking at those students in cash. They were, for the most part, very positive, very friendly. They didn't have that anger. And that positiveness, that friendliness went across so well. It's done good things for us in Minnesota Atheists. We get stories in the Star Tribune pretty regularly because of our friendly attitude. So it's really my pleasure and honor to introduce Hemant Mehta.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming. And I guess what I'll do is basically tell you the story of how this book came about and what the whole selling my soul on eBay thing actually means. Let me give you just a little bit of background about myself. My family is another religion. It's not Christianity. It's called Jainism. Has anyone here heard of Jainism? Wow, that's like 90 more hands than I've ever seen before. A little background about Jainism. Jainism is a belief system from India, and one of their main beliefs is nonviolence. So Jains are almost all vegetarians. There's a lot of things like non-possessiveness, non-materialism, a lot of really great philosophical ideas. Now, Jains also believe in heaven and hell. They believe in karma. They believe in reincarnation. They believe if you do a lot more good deeds in this life than bad deeds, your net karma is lower because you don't have as much bad karma anymore. And when you get reincarnated into your next life, you'll be in a better position in life, whatever that means. But this is what I grew up with. This is the belief system I grew up with. And when I was 14 and I first started thinking about these things critically for the first time, those supernatural beliefs stopped making sense for me. That's when I became an atheist, and now I'm 24. So it's been about 10 years that I've been an atheist. So the reason I bring that up is because growing up, I was never really raised in any sort of Christian environment. I had never visited a Christian church or a Catholic church, and really all I knew about Christianity was what I had heard from my friends or seen on TV or read about in the media. And again, when you see Pat Robertson, people will cringe because that's not real Christianity right there. So this is the perception I had of Christianity. So what I wanted to do is go to church. I wanted to just experience it because I don't want anyone ever telling me, well, you're just an atheist because you've never experienced my Christianity. You've never experienced my church. And if you just thought about Christianity, then you would be saved. I don't want them saying that to me. So I wanted to go to church, but I feel bad about going to church and, poking the person next to me and saying, do you really believe this? You can't do that. You can't go up to the pastor later on and say, come on, you're just joking, right? So what I figured I would do is maybe I'll put up a website. I don't know the first thing about web design, by the way, but I figured I'll create a website or something, and I'll go to church, and I'll put some of those questions on the website. And maybe then people could comment on what I was questioning, and they could say, well, here's why we're doing these rituals. Here's why we believe these things. And maybe I could get the dialogue going that way. I figured that was as good of a way as any to go about doing this. Here's the problem with that. How do people find out about the website? I mean, I'm back to where I started. No one knows what I'm doing, so how can they have this dialogue with me, And then I thought of that grilled cheese sandwich, that piece of toast or something with the Virgin Mary on it, right? You saw that. It's kind of religious, and it's definitely got a lot of attention. And so I figured, okay, what about eBay? What if I put something up on eBay that says, I'm an atheist, but I'm kind of interested in going to church. I don't really know where to go, so you could figure out where I go. And as it turns out, there's this Catholic church like 3 feet from where I live. I can go there. And my first thought was, it's not about the money, so for every $1 you bid on eBay, I'll go to that church for a day. The point being, forget about the money. It's just I need something monetary because it's eBay, but I'll go to that church for a day. Then I'm thinking, okay, well, for $5, any kid with an allowance is going to ruin my entire week. So maybe $1 is a little too little bit. Maybe I'll raise it to $10. At least then it'll ward off anyone who just has some spare change lying around. So I said, for every $10 you bid, I'll go to a church. It doesn't even have to be that Catholic church next to me. I'll go to whatever church you want me to go to from Chicago, where I live. I'll go to a mosque, I'll go to a synagogue, temple, whatever, just something different. I want to try something different. And I gave a little bit of background about my atheism, explaining that I work with this group called the Secular Student Alliance. I work with, Minnesota Atheists, a lot of national group. I know these people. I am one of these people. So why don't you send me to church? So this auction goes up live on eBay. It's on a Friday, and this happens at the end of January of last year. And this goes up, and now if you haven't figured it out already, I'm back to the same problem I was when I said I'd put up a website, which is, how do people even know about the eBay auction? Because if they don't know that the auction's going on, I'm, again, back to square one. Where do I go with this? And so I figured, how can I get the message out? How can I get word out about what I'm doing? So there were about 3 things I did in order to let people know about what I was doing. The first thing, the one I found pretty interesting, is on eBay, if you've ever posted something, if I wanted to sell my car on eBay, what do you think potential buyers are going to do? They're going to want to know, why are you selling this thing? They're going to want to know what's wrong with the car. They're going to want to know just things about it. And I'll get those questions as the seller. They can contact me on eBay and ask me these questions. Well, I can answer them, but the nice part about eBay is I can answer them and put my answer right underneath my actual auction. That way people who look at my auction can also look at that question and the answer so that I don't get the same question 100 times. So the first guy that emails me finds this auction. I don't know who he was, but he found it. And he asked me a question. Well, tell you what, I believe in the Taco Bell God. So if I win this auction, will you worship the Gordita God? And clearly this is not how this is supposed to work. But I told him, well, a Gordita God makes as much sense to me as any other God, so not only will I go to Taco Bell, I'll baptize it in fire sauce. So I put up this question, but the funny thing is, I guess as people started seeing that question, they asked me more serious questions. Why are you an atheist? How can you actually not believe in God? And questions that, surprise me because they seem obvious to me. But you realize that a lot of people coming to this auction have never met an atheist. They've never spoken to an atheist before. So I had a really great opportunity to answer these questions in a positive way, saying, well, here's why I don't believe in God. Here's why prayer doesn't work for me. Someone even asked, where do mountains come from if there's no God? I sent them the link to Wikipedia. There are perfectly logical explanations to everything. But this is the first thing. People started seeing, hey, here's an atheist who's actually answering my questions, and they're not really making fun of me. They're not attacking me for asking the question. They're just answering it, and it's kind of nice. And so I think one of the reasons the eBay auction spread in the first place is that people knew they could ask me questions, and they knew I would answer them, provided it was a real, legitimate question and not something crazy. The next thing I did is, how many of you working with this group, Minnesota Atheists, working with another group, you've tried to send out press releases to local media telling them what you're doing? How many people here have done that? A few people here. Well, I tried to do that. I had some friends at the Secular Student Alliance, and I asked them, can you help me craft a press release about what I'm doing? I don't know how to do this, but maybe people will be interested. So we made a press release, and I sent it to the big Chicago papers, the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times. And we basically said, Hemant Mehta, a 22-year-old atheist, is doing this auction on eBay. OK, none of those newspapers responded back anytime soon. There was also a local suburban paper called the Daily Southtown. It's in the south suburbs of Chicago where I live. I sent them the same press release with one added phrase. It said, Hemant Mehta, a 22-year-old from Chicago, and a graduate of the local Carl Sandburg High School, is doing this auction on eBay. Just tossing in that local angle to see if it would work. And they called me back the next day. And they said, OK, this is interesting. What are you doing? Let's talk. So I talked to this reporter. I told him what I was doing, a little bit about my background. And a couple days later, the front page of the Daily Southtown had this headline, Auction for Salvation. So I can pass that around, and you can check that out. But they put it on the front page of that local paper. And it's not just a local paper. It has pretty wide distribution in the south suburbs. So now people are reading that article and going to the website for that reason. So word of advice to anyone doing anything, make it as local as possible. They'll come to you. But also, the nice thing they put about it is, I wasn't angry about it. I wasn't mean about what I was doing. I wasn't attacking religion. I was just curious. And I kind of liked the article. It was very nice. Here's the last thing I did. I was thinking, who would get really riled up? Who would get pissed off if they heard about what I was doing? First thought that came into my head, Republicans. So I asked some friends. I don't know any Republican websites. And I don't know any Republican bloggers. Do you guys know any? And someone suggested one called the Dawn Patrol. I don't know much about it, but apparently it gets a lot of readers. So I emailed the girl who runs this website, Dawn Eden, and I said, hey, here's a little bit about what I'm doing. If you need proof that I'm a real atheist or something, here's some links to work I do with the other atheist groups. But would you mind putting this up on your sites? And she put up the posting in like less than an hour. She's like, all right, it's up. Okay. And I read this thing, and she put an excerpt from the eBay auction. And at the bottom, she also said, for those of you who think he's trying to con you or he's just trying to do this for money, I checked out his email address. I checked out who he is. And he really is who he says he is. He really does work with atheist groups. He's not lying about what he's doing. And honestly, I think he's pretty sincere about it. So go check it out. So now we have people coming from all over the place. And they start emailing their friends like, hey, check out this auction. Look at what this guy is doing. And now it's kind of out of my hands. And now people are just spreading it virally. I have nothing to do with it. But more people are coming to the eBay website. They're checking out the auction. At this point, it's about midway through the 7 days. And it's about at $100. And this is crazy, because 10 days is a lot more than I bargained for. I figured maybe someone will bid $10 at most, and I'll go to church for a day, and then I'll go check out a movie with the $10, and that'll be that, But now it's at $100. That's kind of crazy. A couple other things happened that same couple days. One is I get an email from another reporter who says, all right, I'll bite. What are you doing? And I respond to her. And I also get an email from this radio show, and the guy emails me and says, hey, man, I like what you're doing. Have you heard of Kirk Cameron from Growing Pains? And he says, do you want to be on Kirk Cameron's radio show? And I'm like, hell yes. It's Kirk Cameron. So I say yes. And then after I say yes, I'm like, Kirk Cameron's doing a radio show? Let me Google that. And the first thing that comes up is man-on-the-street interviews for this radio show that Kirk Cameron does. They go out on the streets and they stop people. And who wants to play a little game with me right now? We'll do what Kirk Cameron does to the people he meets on his streets. I need a volunteer somewhere. Sir, what's your name again?
Jack.
Jack, are you a good person?
Yes, I'm a good person.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
Have you ever lied?
Yes.
What does that make you?
That makes me a human being.
That makes you a liar. Have you ever stolen anything?
Not that I can recall.
Are you sure, even as a kid?
As sure as Ronald Reagan was when he couldn't recall.
All right. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Have you ever taken the Lord's name in vain?
All the time.
And what does that make you?
That makes me an atheist.
That makes you a blasphemer. So let me ask you again. Are you a good person? And yet you are a lying blasphemer. On the day of judgment, are you going to heaven or hell?
I'm going nowhere.
Oh, you are going to hell, sir. This is the game they play with random people they meet on the streets. And now I'm watching this video and I'm kind of freaked out because I'm like, I'm going to answer the exact same thing he just did. And how am I going to get out of it? There's really no way to do it. And so I figured, okay, I'm going to be on there. Maybe I can try to avoid the line of questioning altogether. By the way, if you haven't seen that clip of video, maybe you have seen this clip of Kirk Cameron and his partner on the radio show, Ray Comfort, holding a banana and saying, this is the atheist's worst nightmare. Yeah, it's the same radio show. It's that group. Google that if you haven't found that yet. Atheist banana nightmare. Google that. So I go on Kirk Cameron's radio show, and I can't get out of the line of questioning, and they do the exact same thing I just did with our volunteer. And so basically, for the 40-minute segment I had with Kirk Cameron, there were 2 minutes talking about the auction, 38 trying to tell me I'm completely wrong about evolution. So good times. And now I'm thinking, great, this is what I've gotten myself into. And this is the last day of the auction. At this point, the auction has jumped up to like $300. And now it's like a month of church that I'm committed to. Again, not part of the plan. But, okay, so the Kirk Cameron thing happens, and now it's later at night, the auction's coming to a close, and now I'm kind of interested, because I don't know how high this is going to go, but I figure it's not going to get much higher. I also made a pledge. I made a little amendment to the original auction where I said, whatever money gets donated, I want to show people this isn't for the money. I'm not doing it to scam people. Whatever money you donate here on eBay, I'm going to donate it to the Secular Student Alliance. So if there's some really, really rich Christian out there with a lot of money, just know it's going to an atheist group, all right? But this auction's ending, and you know, it's about an hour left before the auction ends, and I'm just clicking refresh, refresh. And sometimes the money amount doesn't change, but you could see how many people are checking out that website, and it's jumping every single time I refresh. So it gets close to the end. Now it's at 400. And again, now I'm freaking out. There's like a minute left, and I don't know if you've heard of eBay snipers. eBay snipers are people who have programs that watch an auction and bid for you at the very last second so that no one else can outbid you. So some guy named Jim, who had emailed me earlier in the week asking, are you doing this for real? Like, seriously? And I told him, yes, I am. Well, this Jim guy, he had put in a bid for like $400. It was outbid. And now we're getting close to the end of the auction. It jumps up in the last minute to $500. And then with about 4 seconds left to spare, Jim gets one more sniping bid in for $504. And now the auction's ended. And now I'm just kind of sitting at my computer wondering how the heck I'm going to do this thing. But the auction's over. And I get an email from Jim. I check out Jim's website because I realize he's the guy that won. And within 2 seconds of this auction ending, on his website, we won the eBay Atheist. He had it ready to go. He knew he was going to win this auction. So I talked to Jim, and we decide to meet in Chicago on the Monday. Now, Jim is from Seattle, Washington. And that reporter I'd been talking to earlier in the week, she got a green light from her editors to come to Chicago to do the story. So she was going to fly in the Monday. After that weekend, Jim was going to fly in as well. We all met up on that Monday. And we talked about what we were going to do now, because I owed Jim like 50 church visits. And Jim, who was an ex-pastor from Seattle, said, you know what? I don't want you to go to 50 days of church. I don't want you to go to 50 churches, because I'm a pastor, and I don't want to go to 50 churches. So why don't you go to like 10, 15 churches, but instead of making your own website and writing about your experiences there, why don't you write about your experiences on my website? And his website was basically an online Christian ministry. And he said, why don't you write about your church experiences there? Because I think a lot of Christians would be interested in what you have to say. Okay, so that first day that we met with the reporter, we went to that Catholic church next to where I live. The Catholic church is called Old St. Patrick's Church, and it's one of the few buildings in Chicago that survived the Chicago fire from the 1800s. Historical landmark, beautiful place on the inside. And we go there, and you know, some of the things I just observed, having never been to one of these real services, is there was a lot of kneeling, standing up, a lot of the church exercises and stuff. But a lot of the people were almost going a beat ahead of when the pastor told them to do it. It's like they had the motions down and they were just doing it. There was the priest that was up on stage, or the father, and he told a story about, he was giving a sermon at noontime about how he had given up addiction and how he had smoked for so long, but with God's help, he gave up smoking cold turkey one day and he'd never been back since. He'd never smoked again, which I thought was a very powerful story, even if I disagreed about the God aspect to it. And he said this really powerful story, and then he went back to the script, like, all right, we're now going to have communion, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I'm just like, you had me. I mean, I was really listening to you, and you lost me. What was up with that? So I write this stuff. I write it on Jim's website, and there were so many people, atheists, Christians, all going to Jim's website to see what I had written, and they were commenting, and they were like, you know what's funny? I've never felt like I could say that, because, it's my church, or I know people, and I know it would offend people, but you don't seem really angry about it. You're just kind of saying it like it is. And they were commenting, and they were saying they appreciated it, they liked it. And I went to more churches. I went to really large African-American churches. I went to large mega churches. There's one called Willow Creek in South Barrington, Illinois. It's probably the biggest foundation to all the mega churches you see in this country. So we went to all these places. And I don't hear from that reporter again for like a month. So I've done about 5 reports by this time for Jim, going to all different churches in Chicago. And finally, I get a call from this reporter. She says, hey, the article's done. I got it all edited. It's going to be in the paper this coming Thursday, like a month after the auction ends. And I'm thinking, okay, that'll be exciting. And then that Thursday, I wake up and I get an email from her saying, hey, here's the article if you want to check it out. And I read the article. It's a really nice article. And there's a convenience store downstairs from this apartment where I live. I go to that convenience store, and this reporter was working for the Wall Street Journal. I pick up the paper, and I realize it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And what's more, they have one of those crazy pointillism images on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And by the way, here's the relevant part, too. Look at what the headline says. On eBay, an atheist puts his own soul on the auction block. which is cute. It's a metaphor, right? I'm putting my soul on the auction block. But the article was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I get back up, I look at that paper in the convenience store. I'm just kind of staring at it, because that's a really surreal experience. And the owner of that place is like, what are you looking at? And I'm like, this is me. And he's like, no way, let me see that. He's trying to compare the picture to me and back. But I go back upstairs to my apartment, and I'm like, you know what I should do today? I should shave. That's always good. And normally that takes, what, 5 minutes? Not even. It takes about 3 hours for me to shave that day, because from the second I get up to my apartment and lather up to the second I can actually finish, the phone keeps ringing. And who is calling? Good Morning America calls. The Chicago Sun-Times called. Apparently they found the press release I sent months ago. Anderson Cooper 360, Fox News Channel, a game show needed a panelist. There were some absolutely crazy phone calls. A movie agent saying, hey, let me represent you. A lot of crazy things. Now, most of those major news organizations had real news to cover, so they had to bump me, which understandable. Guess which one channel actually did end up doing something? Fox News, yes. So I go on Fox News over that weekend. And the lady there, really nice anchor woman, whoever she was, but she was like, Hemant, what does it feel like to sell your soul? And I'm like, well, I didn't sell my soul, but here's what I really did. And you see her, she's nodding, smiling, So Jim, what does it feel like to own Hemant's soul? So this happens. And by the way, if you go on YouTube and type in eBay Atheist, you could watch that clip. But the Chicago Sun-Times said, let us just send a photographer over. We're just going to reprint the Wall Street Journal's article in tomorrow's paper. Can we just get a picture? So the photographer comes, and I meet him next to Old St. Pat's Church, next to where I live. And we're taking some pictures outside. He's like, this is okay, but I'd much rather go inside the church. And he had told me this earlier. I called up the church, and I'm like, hi, is your church open today at 4 o'clock? And they're like, who wants to know? Maybe they had read the article. And so they said we're closed. So I met the photographer, and we were taking pictures outside the church because it was closed. But then we're like, this isn't great. Let's see if we can get inside the church. The doors were open, so we snuck up into the balcony. We took a picture, and then the next day in the Chicago Sun-Times, he sold his soul for $504. Picture inside Old St. Pat's Church. But now what started happening is all this media, everyone saw the Wall Street Journal article, then they saw all these other papers picking up on it, and then everyone wanted something. There was an Indian newspaper that had a headline that said, Indian sells his soul on eBay for $504. The Seattle Times, because Jim Henderson, the buyer, was from Seattle, they had a headline saying something similar. This is from a French magazine. I have no idea what it says, but it's about it. But it started getting to the point where I couldn't keep up with all the stuff people were writing about it, and I would go check out some of the things people were writing, and they had so many of the details wrong, which is frustrating, and I didn't really feel like correcting every article I came across. But this is what happened. One thing I do want to read to you, an excerpt from the Village Voice newspaper in New York City. And here's something they wrote. And I read it partly because they say some really nice stuff, but I'd really like the last sentence. In the future, no marketing textbook will be complete without a chapter on Hemant Mehta, the 22-year-old who last month sold his soul on eBay. It's not that he made a killing on the item itself, which at a closing price bid of $504 presumably sold for a loss. But on the upside, whoa, this stunt has racked up several ad campaigns worth of exposure for the product he was actually marketing, atheism as a wholesome American way of life. That was really sweet. Thank you. So for all the stuff that was being written about how this was some sort of weird stunt, it's some guy putting up his soul on eBay, which by the way, you can't sell your soul on eBay if you tried, because I believe eBay considers it a body part. So you can't actually do that if you wanted. Which was a question I got. How did you sell your soul on eBay? Everyone else can't do it. But the interesting thing is, not only did mainstream media pick up on this, a lot of Christian groups picked up on this story as well, because they were like, he's going to a bunch of Christian churches, a lot of evangelical churches, a lot of black churches, a lot of all of these types of churches. And so there were a couple magazines that ran stories. This one's in Charisma Magazine and Christian Life. James Dobson, A Focus on the Family. He has a column in this thing, That's the type of magazine it is. They did a story, but the way it sounded, it made it sound like I converted at the very end of it, And this is the downside, because sometimes you don't have control over how this stuff gets portrayed. But it was interesting that the Christian magazines and media were picking up on it. Now, later on in the summer, there were some more media events and things like that, but there were a couple really great people from Christian media that did a lot of cool things. There was one journal for pastors. It was called Leadership Journal. I talked to this girl from there who was really interested in the story. By this time, I had completed all of my visits for Jim Henderson. I had written all the critiques up there. And she asked me, we had a long conversation about how this would come across, what would happen as a result of it. And so they wrote a really positive story in Leadership Journal. The interesting thing is they didn't just write about what I liked about my church-going experiences. They made it very clear this is what he found problems with when he went to church. And that's really the point I wanted to get across to the Christians that were reading it. So there were a couple really nice things, and I'll pass that around as well. Here's one more magazine called Outreach Magazine. Take a wild guess what they're trying to outreach, who they're trying to outreach to. Inside the mind of the unchurched. And this was creepy. An atheist goes to... By the way, as much as I like this picture, just if you look really carefully at the shading, this kind of looks like I have devil horns. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. I'll take questions when we're done, if you can. Oh, yeah. Keep passing them around, and they should be getting to you soon. And I'll pass this one around as well. But one more thing that happened is, as these Christian media were picking up on this story, Jim Henderson had written a book called AKA Lost, also known as Lost. And it was about people who hadn't been saved by Jesus and how to evangelize to them. And it wasn't just, proselytization like you see on the street. Someone comes up to you, starts preaching to you, because we're all sick of that. And he was sick of that too. He found it embarrassing. So he said, the subtitle, I believe, was, "What if evangelism just meant being yourself and just talking to people, and maybe by seeing what you're like, they'll come to Christ." This is the premise of a book he wrote a couple years ago. It sold moderately well, but the publisher was a Christian publisher owned by Random House. It's called Waterbrook Press. Waterbrook Press then, since Jim wrote a book for them, they kept tabs on him. They want to see what their author is doing. And when the Wall Street Journal article came out, obviously that was a big deal for them as booksellers as well, because Jim's book was mentioned in that article. So they were reading the things I was writing. They were seeing the comments people were making about my visits. And so they contacted me and said, it's funny that you're writing all these things about churches and people aren't getting upset. People kind of like what you're saying. People are learning from what you're saying. And by the way, a lot of those things I wrote for Jim Henderson's website, a lot of the pastors found out about the stuff I was writing. They would make comments on the same website. If I didn't like something they did, they said, you know what, this is something I try to change every week and something I try to do better. But clearly it's not working. I'm going to try harder. Okay, there were some pastors who completely disagreed with what I said, but they came on the website and wrote that I disagree with what you're saying, which, again, they weren't expecting that. So Waterbrook Press asked me, why don't we send you to a whole bunch of different churches across the country, and why don't we have you write some more church critiques outside the ones for Jim, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your background about atheism, how you came to atheism, and we'll put that into a book. And so that book is the one that is coming out on Tuesday. I sold my soul on eBay. And I said, when they approached me with the title, I'm like, but I didn't sell my soul. And they're like, don't worry, it's catchy. And if people flip the book over, they'll see what you really did, and that's fine. But the interesting thing as this book is coming out, and I wrote up more of these critiques, I started my own website then when I was done with Jim Henderson's write-ups. It was called friendlyatheist.com, and it was just a chance for me to talk about, some of the things I've been doing. And really, it's blossomed into something I'm really proud of, just kind of a time to elaborate on things going on in the atheist world. So that's been a really cool experience. One of the churches we went to, and one story that is in the book, we went to Ted Haggard's church in Colorado. And this was about a month, and if you don't know Ted Haggard, there's a couple reasons I had heard of him before my visits. One was Time Magazine named him like the 25 most important evangelicals, or influential evangelicals in the country. And also Ted Haggard, if you've seen the Richard Dawkins movie, The Root of All Evil, Ted Haggard is the pastor Richard Dawkins visits, and then they get in a little kerfuffle about evolution. And Ted Haggard says something to the extent of, if you knew the scientists that I knew, then you too would be great like me. Something like that. We tried to get an interview with him. We contacted him saying, there's an author coming, can we interview you after we're done with the service that day? And when they found out I might be writing some negative things about my visit, because I do good and bad for everywhere I go, they said no. But we went to his church, and about a month after we visited, he was the guy in the news because he had had sex with a gay prostitute and bought meth from him and apparently flushed it down the toilet. But we went to see Ted Haggard's church, and his service was one thing, interesting in a lot of ways. But after he was done, he was the only megachurch pastor that I saw during all these visits. Most of the pastors go backstage when they're done with their sermon. They just kind of, we saved my thing, I'm going to leave now. Ted Haggard, we went to the second service on a Sunday. The first service was going on, and we're just kind of looking through the windows, through the doors, seeing it. Ted Haggard finished the sermon and just stepped down from the podium, just kind of stood there, and people could come up to him and talk to him, and he was having conversations, he was laughing. That was cool. I hadn't seen that before. While the sermon people left, while the congregation left, we all migrated in and sat and took our seats. And after he was done with that service, again, he just kind of stepped down and started talking to anyone who wanted to come to him. So we figured, hey, well, he didn't give us an interview, but why not just approach him now? And so, I had a chance to ask him, I've only seen you really in the Richard Dawkins documentary, and you kind of don't come off so well. And he said, I haven't seen that video yet, which is strange because I've been to a lot of atheist meetings where we play it just because it's funny. But I asked him, here's what Richard Dawkins says in the documentary. Is that accurate? I mean, did they edit it or were you portrayed wrongly? And his only response was, Richard Dawkins is an idiot. Thank you, Pastor. But again, there was a lot of stories like those. We went to a bunch of other churches. Joel Osteen's church in Texas was another big one. But we went all over the place. And one of the things, I want to talk a little bit about why this has worked so well, like maybe why this auction, as much of a crazy stunt as it might be, why has this gotten attention, whereas a lot of the things atheists have done have not? And there were a few reasons. I want to just mention a couple things that have gotten negative publicity that atheists have done, and maybe we could see a theme in them. One of them is, 5 years ago, we had this chance to do something really, really amazing where they have the Godless Americans March on Washington, and atheists could go to Washington, D.C. and just let ourselves be known that we are a constituency and we are out here. And we called it the Godless Americans March. It's almost, saying, screw you religious people, And as positive of an event as it was, got very little media coverage. And the media coverage that it did get, not very positive. And part of it was because of that word godless. That wasn't horrible. There was another college group in Texas. They had a campaign. They wanted to promote their campus atheist group. So they had a campaign called the Smut for Smut campaign, where if you turn in your Bibles, we'll give you porn. Because really it's the same thing. Again, did they get publicity from their campus newspaper? Absolutely. Local papers picked up on it. How do you think that made atheists look? Again, we talk so much about rational dialogue and positive discourse, and then we do things like that. There was also a video that was up. Have you heard of the Blasphemy Challenge from the Rational Response Squad? It's kind of a chance for people to go into a camera, say you're an atheist, or what have you, and somewhere in there just say the phrase, I deny the Holy Spirit. I actually like this challenge because I think the focus is more on challenge than the blasphemy. there are a lot of people, a lot of young people, who have made videos where they say, for the first time in a lot of cases, I'm an atheist, this is why I'm an atheist, and it doesn't have to do because, I hate religion or, Christianity did something horrible to me when I was a kid. It's just they really present a lot of really good reasons for why they became atheists. And it's incredible to see so many of those videos up on YouTube. And how powerful is that? Then I saw this one video by one guy who basically said, and I'm going to use offensive language, pardon the language, this is the Bible. This is a pile of shit. This is dog shit. That's also a pile of shit. This is shit. This is shit. And basically picked it up with ripped pages from the Bible. Which of those videos do you think is going to spread across the internet a lot faster? Again, when we have the opportunity to present ourselves the way we want to present ourselves, we got to stop doing these really dumb things. And there are a few cases where people have had the opportunity, to really dictate how they get perceived. And some cases where we don't. Michael Newdow tried to get Under God out of the pledge. I think that was a great thing he tried to do, and he got a lot of negative publicity for it, but again, it wasn't in his control. He was doing what he had to do, and just because people didn't like what he was doing, yes, he's going to get negative press for that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we have the chance to portray atheism or just tell people about atheism, how can we do it in a positive way? How many people were here when Lori Lippman Brown came last month? A lot of people here. Lori Lippman Brown's a great example. She's the lobbyist for the Secular Coalition for America, the first lobbying group in the country for atheists and agnostics. If you see her speak, you just watch her and you're like, you can't not like her. She's very likable. And when she goes into congressional offices, they're very eager to talk to her. She has a business card that has the word atheist written on it, and yet she can walk into many offices that you would not imagine that she could walk into. And it's because she puts out this very positive image, How many people here have heard of Julia Sweeney, Pat from Saturday Night Live? A lot more raised hands when they said Pat. She has a one-woman show out called Letting Go of God. It's her one-woman show about how she went from being a Catholic to becoming an atheist much later in life. And again, when you listen to that show, my parents are still religious, they're still Jain, but I would have no problem having them see her show. And I've heard a lot of Christians say, I have no problem bringing my religious family to see her show because you can't watch her and dislike her. She presents a very logical reason why she's an atheist. It's very funny, but the main thing is it doesn't offend religious people. It's not there to say Catholicism is evil and wrong. She even says, yes, there are a lot of problems with it, especially with priests and the abuse scandals now, but that's not the Catholicism that I knew, The one I knew was a big part of my life, and it meant a lot to me, and it was great. But I'm an atheist, and here's why. And again, it's a very positive discussion. Yes?
Her name again?
Julia Sweeney. Julia Sweeney is her name. One more example, and a contrasting college atheist group. One in Florida had a recent event where they had a debate on God's existence. And the way they promoted it, instead of doing something like Smut for Smut, is they went out on their campus, put a big poster on a table, and it said, "Free hugs from atheists." And that's it. They didn't push the event at all. They just said, get a free hug from an atheist, and just to see how many people would come, because you don't really see that very much. And they would say, we're doing an event. Would you like to know more about it? If the people said yes after the hug, they would tell them about this debate going on. Again, totally positive image. Do you think they got publicity for their event? They did, and they got really good press, not just from their campus paper, but from local newspapers as well. And the last example, Pete Stark. This is Lori Lippman Brown's doing as well, or the Secular Coalition for America's. Pete Stark is a Democratic congressperson from California. Recently came out as the first congressperson to not believe in God. Didn't call himself an atheist, but he said, I don't believe in God. How much backlash did he see? Very little. And the little backlash that he did see was from some fringe Christian groups that really don't get much attention in the first place. That was great. Again, it's not because he was coming out and saying, I hate everyone with religion, or because he said all those other Congress people that believe in God are crazy. It's because he said, you know what, this is who I am, and there's nothing wrong with that. One interesting thing is, if you watch Real Time with Bill Maher, he had Governor Mike Huckabee from Alabama on a couple weeks ago, and Bill Maher said, Pete Stark came out as he said atheist, but he came out as an atheist. What do you think about that? Can atheists hold a higher office? Huckabee, who's one of the most conservative guys you'll see, said, you know what? I think if that's who he is, he should be honest about who he is. And as long as he could fulfill the roles of a president or someone in a higher office, then he should be allowed to be whatever he wants to be. Do you think you would get that response, decades ago? I don't think so. So there's a lot of positive publicity if we can present ourselves in a positive way. One more example that came out is the Chicago Reader, is the alternative weekly newspaper in Chicago. They just ran an article Friday for this coming week about this book's release. And again, if you get a chance to read it, there's very little I have to argue with in this article. But it was a really, really positive, again, just an example of positive media that can come if you're just open about atheism. People are so curious about it now, especially because of books like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, that we have such a cool opportunity to present atheism to the masses. And we got to make sure we could do something positive about it and not turn people off now that they're interested in us in a good way. The last thing, I put up a posting on my website a couple months ago that basically said, here's why I'm not an angry atheist. The interesting thing about my blog is that a lot of atheists participate in the comments, make comments, and read it, but a lot of Christians do as well. And a lot of the moderate Christians I've seen, if you read Sam Harris's books, he says that fundamental religious people are completely wrong, and they're going to cause chaos. But moderate religious people are just helping them. They're not stopping them from doing it, and they're the cause for a lot of the fundamentalism. And yet the moderate religious people that come to my website that actually speak for themselves say that that's completely wrong. They're probably closer to us than they are of them. And here's something I wrote on my site, why I'm not an angry atheist. If your religious beliefs, illogical as they may be, are doing something positive for our community and our world, and in the process you're not trying to stop scientific progress, impede promising research, hurt my gay friends, control another woman's body, force your beliefs upon anyone else, ask the government to give you special privileges, or make me fear coming out as an atheist in public, why should I be attacking you? I got attacked by a lot of atheists for writing that. But the funny thing is a lot of the atheists said, well, of course I'm attacking you because there are no moderate religious people who think that way and believe that there were so many Christians who wrote in and said, no, that is what I want. I want the government not to interfere with my beliefs, but I want to believe whatever I want to believe, and I don't want anyone else attacking me for it. So I'm completely with you. I think you guys have all the rights in the world. You shouldn't be discriminated against, and there is discrimination against atheists. And they were saying these things, and these are Christians saying it. And I don't think we ally with them nearly enough. That's pretty much all I wanted to say, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and thank you. Yes.